Hi everyone, welcome back to VCC Talks, the podcast for everything clean transportation. I'm your host, Ella Sher, and I'm back for another episode with our special guest for today, David Robinson. David serves as Secretary of VCC's Board of Directors and has been in the environmental field for the entirety of his career. He is the founder and creative director of Birch Studio, a design and branding agency, and a co-founder of Earthwork Collective, a group of creative individuals whose mission is to make the environment a better place. We're so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So let's dive a little bit into these questions. So as a creative individual, your path to the world of alternative fuel was unique. Could you share a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah, that is a good question. It's been a long ride. My first memory of being aware of the environment is my dad telling me at a young age to not throw trash on the ground. So since then, I took that message to heart, and I had never done it since, and I really started picking up trash. As I got into college, I became aware of recycling and started a recycling program in my apartment building and moved to Charlottesville and started my professional career and just really loved the environment. The best thing about Charlottesville for me was being so close to the woods. It's a nature that I can enjoy, so I just kept that love alive. Another track in my history was being very interested in how things work and technology. So I had always loved taking my toys apart to see how they worked. I did that more than I played with them, I think, because I really love seeing how things work. So later on, when I started my career and I realized I wanted to focus on something, I was doing a Venn diagram for myself. Like, what am I interested in? I'm interested in environment, interested in technology, and interested in creativity. So I took those three things and overlapped them. And what I have is what I do now. Basically built my career out of a Venn diagram.
Oh, that's so cool. I definitely relate to the taking toys apart sort of thing. I was a big Lego kid, and so I always would try to figure out how things worked, and I feel like that's really been also foundational for my environmental interest. But that's super cool, and thanks for sharing. Alrighty, so next question. How have some of your previous pursuits, particularly your background in architectural education, informed your current view on alternative fuels?
Yeah, that definitely was not a straight path. Architecture did not prepare me for environmental pursuits, I'd say, but I think it was the skill set that I brought to it and the interests of solving problems was very strong. So I loved architecture because I found there is a creative outlet and a way to solve specific problems and issues. I got into graphic design. It has the essentially same skill set, and I understand a lot of crossover between the two majors and careers. So using that background and just knowing my skill set and interest in solving specific problems and knowing there's technology involved helped me to realize where that came from and why it's still a good fit for me. Because I really had to explain why I'm not using my architecture degree. And I felt like, it actually makes sense, in that perspective.
Definitely. It's a very creatively oriented major, too. So next question. I understand that you're a co-founder of Earthwork Collective. It's like I said, a group of climate communicators passionate about sort of collective action, which is always really intriguing. Could you share some more about maybe your role and what led you to help create an organization like this?
Sure. Yeah, that was a great project I had been involved with. I met a bunch of great people working on a project, and this project was a great project that was started by best-selling author Seth Godin. He's big in marketing and personal advice, and he had started a project to build called the Carbon Almanac. It was pretty ambitious, but it was volunteer-driven. Like he started, It was all not officially nonprofit, but it was non-profit. But put together a book. So we had 300 people working together to put together a single book. And it was an amazing experience. And it was very well run, I would say. It was very grassroots. Seth was top of the heap, but it was a very equal and flat organization. And I met a lot of wonderful people there. After we had built and shipped the book, I made a lot of friendships, and I really wanted to stay in touch with people and wanted to keep doing something. The book was just one thing. So there were a handful of people that wanted to continue on after the project. So we got together and talked and for hours and into years, frankly, just to see what we are good at as a team and where we can make an impact. So it came out of that we are all communicators. We're all creative. We're supportive of each other. So we have 5 co-founders at this point and a flat organization, and we share roles very seamlessly back and forth between each other. The organization Earthwork Collective started offering, at this point we built some courses in sustainability, or beyond sustainability I should say, which is regenerative practices. So not just keeping what we have steady, but rebuilding what we've already taken away and lost.
Wow. Could you get a little bit more maybe into the regenerative practices?
Yeah, there's a there's a lot to it. It's intuitive once you know what it is. Sustainability is about keeping things even, about where we are, sustaining what we have, but we've already destroyed a lot of things. So, for instance, we need to replant trees, we need to rebuild communities, we need to re-equalize, pay structures and social equity. Keeping it as it is not really sustainable.
Right.
Like our sustainability path is not sustainable because we're on a destructive path. So sustainability is a short-term fix. It's more of a transitional thing. So regenerative practices rebuild the soil, rebuild organisms, the ecosystems, both physical, natural ecosystems as well as social ecosystems where there's balance and respect. And we understand that each participant has a significant role to play no matter how small.
Wow, that's so cool. And that's so cool that you're sort of the lead on that.
And I've had, I credit my co-founders, and a few of them in particular read a whole lot more than I do, and they're more, but I'd say definitely more visionary, where they're pulling in information from sources that I don't see. So it's a great thing about having a group of partners,
right,
where everyone's got some strengths. And there's a book that we came across called The Regenerative Enterprise, which we highly recommend, and actually it's an 8-part course. It was based on the principles illustrated in this book.
Wow. Well, that's super cool. Building off of that also, how do you see climate communication efforts playing a role in the adoption of specifically alternative fuels?
Yeah, communication is huge for mundane issues and big ones. If you can't communicate with someone, then you can't move forward. We see that so much now where people are yelling at each other or yelling across each other, past each other. There are many facets to communication. There's listening is a very, very important one. There's being clear about what one is saying, not exaggerating. To say there are no trees left in the world, like someone could easily say that. You can imagine someone saying that. Right. What they really mean is we're losing a lot of trees, or there are fires everywhere. Like, they're not literally everywhere. There definitely are fires, and they're huge, and they're more than it used to be. So communicating accurately is very important. And when we don't communicate accurately, we irritate the other side. So or people that aren't on the same page. So if I say there are fires everywhere and someone else doesn't agree, like we need to do anything, they're just going to be irritated and think I'm a fool because I'm just thinking there literally are fires everywhere. So what I may say as an exaggeration, and I know I'm exaggerating, someone else can take as if I'm thinking that's the fact, the whole truth. So communicating accurately is hugely important. And then culturally, we have the same words can mean different things. I was at a conference years ago and I heard a representative from California, and he said, I want to give you all a tip. Stop using the word climate and talking about the environment because you're irritating people by using the word climate. It's too political, which really struck me as odd because climate in the past has just been a word, but now I'm realizing words have meaning beyond their meaning. So there's a certain set of vocabulary that some people use, and there's a set of vocabulary that other people use. So the particular choice of words that you pull into your vocabulary make a difference to the person hearing it. So talking about communicating about climate change to folks that don't care about it, well, they're not going to care about it. But if you communicate about resiliency or keeping your roads intact, like, oh, your roads just washed out in Hurricane Helene, maybe we should find ways to increase resiliency. How do you recover from a disaster? So some of it's about finding common ground, because some people still aren't going to care about carbon in the air, but they're going to care about the roads on the ground. So finding ways to communicate about those issues. And that's really not about communication as much as finding common denominators, common ground with people. And that gets back to listening again, because you want to understand what the other people are going through and what's going to motivate them to make a change.
Right. No, I think that's such a fantastic answer, especially in wake of all of these natural disasters, like you said, Helene and Milton now. Mm-hmm. People are being greatly affected by the environment. And so everyone sort of has this vested interest in at least the built infrastructure that we have to sort of make that resilient. So I really like that word, and I'm glad you chose it. Next up, through your work on VCC's board and broader alternative fuel education, where would you like to see Virginia's adoption of alternative fuels in 5 years, 10 years? What does an ideal relationship with alternative fuels even look like? I know it's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. Interesting one. Yeah, it's vast. There are so many different needs that we have for fuel, obviously. There's transportation, and there's motive power and stationary power. There's manufacturing. There's household, domestic use, and commercial. I feel like the best scenario is having options. The most wonderful thing I think about the alternative fuel burgeoning movement is that we have more options. It has made it harder for people to choose, particularly vehicles. Should I get an electric vehicle, propane vehicle, natural gas gas vehicle. So there's an understandable lack of clarity there. Whereas in the past, it's just you buy diesel or regular gasoline. Now there are so many more options. But the benefit of that is we have better fitting solutions that are more sustainable, less costly. You can reduce the operating costs of vehicles and plants and find ways to recover heat even from certain systems. So having all of the options available is fantastic. Energy can be made, if we're not extracting oil from the ground, we're creating energy or pulling energy from other sources, the sun, the wind, finding it in hydrogen. And so the nice thing about that is it increases our resiliency too, because we're potentially not dependent upon one fuel source if we get that right.
Right. Yeah, that sort of multifaceted world is always super interesting to me. And I think that VCC does a really cool job about sort of combining all of those worlds into one unit. So yeah, no, great answer. Looking back at your experiences, is there a particular key initiative or project you've started that has made you especially proud? I know you talked already about a couple, like the Carbon Almanac and your Earthwork Collective.
That's a hard one. I like all my babies.
Right.
I would say it's probably a little project I did called the Flux Report, which was early on and how I was introduced to Virginia Clean Cities. I was taking data I had found from various sources to try to present complicated information in a simpler way. So I started this newsletter to distribute to folks. So I found the first piece of information I found was from the IBM Institute for Research. I may have gotten their name sort of mixed up a little bit, but it was about they had surveyed CEOs of automobile companies and consumers of electric vehicles. And the question was, what motivates consumers to purchase electric vehicles? So consumers had their own opinions, and then the CEOs had their opinions. So the chart showed both of them together, but you couldn't really, you still had to do the math, essentially, to figure out how far apart these two opinions were, because the CEOs didn't get everything right. So I recalculated it or refigured their graph, turned it into something that was attractive, and then put it out there, and had a friend actually introduce me to Virginia Clean Cities. He's like, who would like this? Let me introduce you to somebody. And that's how I met Alan and Chelsea, his predecessor. So that we ran for probably 2 years. So every month or two, we put together, found some data out there somewhere, helped people understand various facets of this information. Because data is pretty convincing. When you have real data, it's real facts, people are like, oh, I didn't realize that was the situation. Running it through our creative filters that we had at Birch Studio allowed us to get it into more hands. People would stop what they were doing and actually look at it and try to understand what was going on. It was visually interesting enough that they wanted to understand what it was that it was trying to communicate. So that was one of my favorite projects.
That's a great answer. Alrighty, so what is your best advice to young people like me, new to the world of alternative fuels, hoping to pursue a career in it, but not quite knowing where to begin? Your best advice?
I would go back to when you were maybe 6 to 10. Kind of go through what I touched on earlier. Make a Venn diagram of what are the three things that interest you the most. So you've got environmental, so that's a circle. And then if you could find two more things that you really love, whether it's music or art or engineering or just anything completely separate from environmental stuff, go ahead and put together a Venn diagram and then look at where they overlap and what kinds of things are in the center of those circles. Because in this world where we have so many people already doing so many things, at least for creative people, we really need unique things to do. So new ideas, new ways to put things together. One of the principles of regenerative business is called the edge effect, where you have more diversity or a different type of diversity, I would say, on the edge of two systems. So the edge of the forest where that meets the fields, or where the ocean meets fresh water. So the estuaries have brackish water, so that's a totally different environment. So in that space where you have two fields coming together, whether it's creativity and design or environmental work and electrical engineering, there are spaces in between those two, or there's an overlap between those two that's a unique space that I would say fewer people will occupy. So if you go to school for engineering, you're just going to get engineering. Go to school for environmental sciences, you just get environmental sciences. But if you do both, you're a unique individual and you can kind of help tie together these two spaces. So that's edge effect abundance. And then that actually gets back to communication, because if you have one foot in both worlds, you know how to communicate between the two. You know how to translate. And that's what I do a lot of, I feel like, as a creative person, is translating information from my client to the visual thing to the paper, or from a creative solution to a technical solution, because I do the technical side as well. So I work with developers and creative people and clients, and knowing each of those spaces, I'm able to communicate and help translate the messages between them.
Oh, that's so neat. At UVA, I'm an environmental thought and practice major, and it's one of our interdisciplinary majors, they call it. And it's really, really effective because we have to take classes in environmental science, anthropology, history. And so I feel like it's similar to that edge effect where I'm taking these science-based classes, but I'm also able to apply it to historical things and policy and law. And I feel like that's so important when you want to bring all of those worlds together.
Yeah, and I think you could stand to make your dream job out of that.
Right.
For these, if you're interested in 2 or 3 of those things, you end up, if you can get into that, then that's a really good fit.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so we're coming up on our last question here, but I would just like to thank you again for joining me on the show. This has been awesome. Your responses have been great. So any last thoughts that you'd like to share for our listeners?
Wow, I'd love to hear questions that people have. I'm not going to wait for the phones to ring, but I like responding to challenges that are out there. As I said earlier, follow your bliss. That's really what I've done, and it's easier to maintain a career if you really enjoy what you're doing. So I've enjoyed that. I have friends and family that work hard and get paid well for it, but they're not living their dream. And through hard times, I've felt comforted by the fact that I'm doing what I really care about. So if you can do what you really care about and make a career out of it, that's really all you need, plus some money to get by. But yeah, take care.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I hope our listeners follow their bliss as well, as per your advice. So yeah, thank you again.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much, Ella. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Virginia Clean Cities podcast. I'm your host, Ella Sher, and look out for me on new episodes coming soon.